I can't see myself on Zoom anymore. Actually, don't worry. I should be able to fix it. Where did the Zoom thing? Yeah. Okay, here we go. So I can see myself here, which is a bit better. And then I want to have chat on as well. There we go. Okay, I think I'm all covered. Mm-hmm. What? Yes, let us bring that down first. You want me to shop? Okay, get it. Go to, yeah, you can see us and I can see me, and that's good. Yeah, and I'll just start sharing. Yeah. Okay, cool. Hey, hello, how are you? This is Sylvia and Marco. You want to say something as well?
Hello. Yes, welcome to our tutorial.
Yeah, it's a bit nerve-wracking with so many windows. I have no idea what's going on, but hopefully this is going all right so far. And I'm just going to start screen sharing. Okay. So Marco and I will be talking about from perception to interaction with virtual characters. Moving on from Rachel and KTS and Edward's brilliant talk about virtual characters, their, how people actually feel about them, we're actually going to focus on the interaction part of those virtual characters, and in particular, how do we use them in virtual reality. So myself and Marco Gillas were from Goldsmiths, University of London. Today's talk, let me see, right. So a quick outline, I'll be starting with introduction with two character interaction, and now we'll focus on what VR is and what kind of, how VR is different from other media. And then Marco, I'll pass it on to Marco, will focus on the sort of technical details. How do we actually implement interactions with characters in VR? He will also talk about social interaction and non-verbal behavior, and how do we actually, create realistic looking or believable virtual agents in VR. And finally, the two of us will also come back and show you two case studies of our own work, and hopefully that will kind of be a nice wrap up of how those interactive virtual characters are actually used in applications. One in the medical training, one is more in research, and the narrative immersive gaming one is a recent collaboration with two game companies in London. So hopefully these are industry-focused examples. Well, we cover both. Right, I just want to, make it a bit more casual to start with. So obviously, both Marco and I, we met in London. Sorry, I might have to mute my headphone in. I'm muting myself in Discord. I'm getting lots of random noise from there. But anyway, so so basically we actually met Rachel, I think 2 years ago in London when she came over here to give a talk. But my life since March was, like I'm showing on these slides, I'm kind of stuck at home, but at the same time, fortunately I have Oculus Quest, so I've been going to a lots of virtual events, and I have just created my avatar on Spatial.io as well. I'm looking forward to trying their applications as well. So it does kind of make me think about virtual characters slightly differently. But today I'm not going to talk about the social VR side of things. I'm going to kind of focus on the kind of research we've been conducting before COVID-19. Okay, so in the past, since 2005, that's when 2004, that's when I came to the UK, started working at UCL VR Lab, and did my PhD there as well. And then I met Marco there. We've been doing lots of work together. So my work has always been about using virtual characters in a fully immersive VR setting, but in a wide range of applications, including social anxiety for psychotherapy. I work with neuroscientists on using characters for neuroscience research, for instance, to understand autism, the sort of really the neurological mechanisms inside the brain, which makes people with autism different from other people. And I've also been working on medical doctor training, but in particular, we're looking at communication training, how to use virtual character to train them to communicate better or to deal with stressful situations. And finally, more recently, I've been working together with Marco on creating AI characters for immersive gaming. And this is really out of the lab. We're actually, dealing with real world problems. How do we create a game that is responsive, that feels real, but at the same time, it actually works with consumers, which is really exciting piece of work. So I want to kind of go back to quite a long time ago. This is something, this paper I'm referring to here is a write-up in 2012 we published, but the work was actually done in 2005 and 6, probably 7. So this is in the K-Black system. I just want to, start by showing this video of how it is of a sort of virtual character interaction in VR is like about, 15 years ago. Oops, let me just turn on the... Sorry, I'm going back to the start.
Great on you. How much was it? I think it was about £20. It's quite cheap. Thank you very much, though. You look very nice too. Oh, thank you very much.
So I don't know if you have noticed his body movement. He was obviously enjoying this conversation with his virtual woman, and so much so that he is, swinging his body. And he also actually walked all the way to the back wall of the K-Black system we have at the time. And what he didn't know was that the closer he was actually getting towards a virtual character, the further away she actually moved away, because, obviously in the K-Black system, we're tracking the participant. We know exactly where he is, and we actually program the virtual character to maintain an interpersonal distance from him. And also we program the virtual character to be looking at him, maintaining a kind of, whatever the psychological literature at the time suggests, this kind of realistic gaze model. We have other virtual characters populated in the room looking at him occasionally as well, trying to make the interaction a bit more stressful. So there were lots of sort of things we actually have done at the background to make this interaction actually feel believable and realistic. So having shown you that, I hopefully I kind of show you what I'm talking about when I talk about virtual character interaction in VR. That's the kind of thing we were able to do 15 years ago in the lab, but more and more so nowadays with consumer applications as well. So I need you now to forget about that for a while and kind of just go back to about character interaction without VR. So there are a few important concepts I want to go through first. Right. Okay. So virtual characters. I don't have to, say more about how sort of important these characters are in our everyday life after Rachel and Katie, Jess, and Edward's talk. But basically, we see them everywhere, and mainly for everyday life, we see them in entertainment, games, or films. But actually, not all of these characters are relevant for Marco and my part today. This is because we are only talking about characters who are interactive, right? So not the characters you see from films, but the ones you actually see in computer games as the most common sort of consumer application. So these are probably from all these virtual characters I showed. I got rid of all the film characters ones, and these are you see in games or even in sort of early stage the Windows application. You have this Clippy agent jumping up and down. So typically in consumer market, you see them in games, but actually in research and actually in the consumer market now as well, you see them used in training, therapy, education, and also social cognition research. As I've been collaborating with the UCL Neuroscience Lab, we have done lots of work in that front as well. So these are just, typical places where you see those virtual characters. Okay, is everything okay? Sorry, I'm gonna disable this code. Is everything okay? Do I need to be worried about anything? Okay, fine. I'm just gonna continue. But then even with all these virtual characters, there's actually also we can further categorize them into two types: agents and avatars. So the slides I showed you at the very beginning of how I spent my life in social VR, they're actually all avatars, right? So I can embody in an avatar. There's an avatar representing myself, and I can be talking to Marco, who also has his avatar. And we're just like having a Zoom meeting, but instead of seeing each other's face on a flat screen, we see each other's whole body language in a 3D space, but we see each other's virtual characters, right? So these are basically avatars, that virtual character controlled by a real human in real time, right? But actually, there is also another type of virtual character. There are lots of research going into that area as well, and there are lots of technical challenges behind them, but they're super, super useful. And they're called agent, the top one. Or in games, sometimes they're referred to as non-player characters, or NPCs. You might be familiar with this term if you're a gamer. So basically, they are virtual characters driven by computer algorithms rather than real human. So they're driven by computer algorithms also in real time as well. So basically, they have to be designed to be able to react towards whatever is going on inside the computer game, right? So a typical example of these two types of virtual characters, you can see this on this game Pac-Man, which is a classic computer game. I'm not a gamer, but this is one of the very few games I actually play. So in this case, the ghosts, they are agents, and the Pac-Man itself, which is driven by the user, they're avatars. And you can see that ghosts, they actually change their behavior according to where Pac-Man is or how advanced the level is. So there are lots of real-time computational challenge that is behind simulating that agent that actually makes you feel very realistic. Okay, and also I want to now also move on, talk about high fidelity and believability. How does these two concepts actually work with each other? I mean, after Rachel's talk, I think there's not really much question left unanswered in this area, or there are actually a lot more questions you want to ask. But unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to contribute more than her brilliant work. But I just want to give you some insights on how we actually see this topic from a sort of virtual characters in VR perspective. So I just want to show you that, I mean, there are lots of great virtual characters she had showed you, but this is a virtual character probably created something like 10 years ago. So if you're talking about character fidelity, and in terms of visual fidelity, we're really there. We can create virtual characters that look like, basically they exactly look like a human. You can't really tell whether, giving a picture of a virtual character, sometimes I won't be able to tell whether it's from a real human or a virtual character, right? And this is 10 years ago. Now they're even a lot more photorealistic than this one. But we all know that from Rachel's talk, virtual characters is not only about visual fidelity, it's very much about motion fidelity as well. So these two are, Marco and myself, our virtual characters. The difference here is that Marco's character looks quite cartoon-like, and mine is a photogrammetry representation of myself. So it's actually what we consider photorealistic. But the point here I'm trying to make here, which Kat J touched upon just now as well, is that we think between motion and visual fidelity, there's a really interesting relationship, right? So with my character at the moment, it's been animated with, I think it's a simulation, a computer algorithm simulation. But we can definitely use motion capture data for this character. However, if I were trying to use keyframe animation for the first character, I don't think it will work. I think it will look quite creepy. But the same thing is not the same for Marco's character. I think with that kind of cartoon-like character, keyframe animation is completely fine. And you actually see that in the industry as well. So for instance, Pixar films, I don't know, now, but basically most of their films they're sticking to keyframe animation. They don't really use motion capture. And as a result, they also decide to choose kind of low fidelity virtual characters, they're really cartoon-like rather than photorealistic. So there is really this very interesting relationship between visual and motion fidelity that I think everyone who get into the area of creating believable virtual characters, you should really be very careful with. And as today, we're actually focusing on interaction. So there's not much study in this area, but I think probably interactivity is also another dimension of this. And I think there might be an interesting balance that interactivity is also limiting how far you should go in terms of visual and motion fidelity. So more realistic virtual characters with more realistic motions maybe requires better implementation, better sort of technical implementation in terms of interactivity. Otherwise, they will feel creepy. Otherwise, it will have some negative psychological effect rather than positive ones. So if you can only sort of afford certain level of interactivity in how you can program the real-time interaction, then you might want to actually stick to lower fidelity visual and lower fidelity motion at the same time. So that's just a point I'm still figuring that out, but I think there's very likely there's this relationship from some of the study book done as well. And now sort of hopefully I clarified a few sort of insights I have about virtual characters. Let's actually move on to what is virtual reality and how does it actually differ from other media. So I want to show you a couple of videos. So
now you can reach out and grab any of those balls.
I don't know how can I mute this video, but anyway, we can hear the sound of the big deal. Oh, it doesn't play anymore.
Now you can reach out and grab any of those balls. You might want to go back up a little bit. The up button. And you can reach out and grab that wall and move it around.
Wow.
So this is a more typical slice-based way to view brain data.
So this was in 2017 when I attended the IEEE VR conference in Los Angeles, and I tried this application with HTC Vive. I was inside basically. Once I put the headset on, of course, I really have the feeling that I was inside someone's brain, and I had sort of little neurons populated around me, and it was really quite amazing. And what's more amazing is there was a slide alongside the MRI data, which represents with really colorful lines the blood flow of that slide. So I can actually grab it and drag it, and the color will change as the position of the slide changes. So that was such an amazing experience. And also, I was really also interacting with it using my full body. I really felt very much immersed in the experience, and I had a strong feeling of being somewhere else. And I think at the time I kind of just finished my work from UCL neuroscience. I see sort of brain scan images all the time, but I've never really appreciated the level of complexity of the actual sort of brain scan data. And after that moment, I really felt, wow, this is quite amazing what neurosurgeons have to do, or neuroscientists have to do, the amount of effort they put in to understand such a complex and beautiful organ. So that's something. VR is really immersive and it's very invasive as well. It really sort of changes people's cognition, changes people's perception. And another one I want to show is this video. Again, it's kind of quite early work. I think this was developed in 2016. So it's my student Tara, who's with the Oculus Rift arm, but you can see she's not holding any controllers. She's using a Kinect to track her body and displaying it in real time as well. So I think now it is possible with Oculus Quest, just as it is. You don't have to hook up different devices together. So even as a consumer, if you turn the gestural interaction on, you can get rid of the controllers and actually interact with VR with your real body. So the point I'm trying to make here is that VR is a really embodied experience. It is an experience not just for you to type some buttons. It's really an experience better to have it with your actual body, get rid of the controllers, and there's a lot that you can actually get out of using VR this way. So what is virtual reality? So virtual reality is a set of illusions. The most important one is place illusion. Let me switch off the video here. So basically you see things in stereo, you have your head tracked, you have a really wide field of view, so there's no escape. You're really trapped in this sort of virtual world. You don't see anything from the real world. And this is something called place illusion, the strong illusion of being somewhere else rather than the real environment. And the second one is plausibility illusion. I think I'm going to try to play this video to explain this point.
I'm comfortable in social situations.
No, not usually. So I disagree.
You're usually at ease when talking to someone of the opposite sex.
Say it again?
You're usually at ease when talking to someone of the opposite sex.
Oh. Do I really have to ask this question?
It would be nice if you could, yeah.
I disagree.
try to avoid talking to people unless you know them well?
No.
So in this case, you can see there is this participant talking to a virtual character, and she's actually, in this case, I would say between an avatar and an agent, because we did have someone pressing buttons to trigger a movement, but we did have to design all the interaction to make sure that she has a big range of reactions, so that we're not coming up with anything in real time. So basically, going back to my point, so I'm trying to explain what plausibility illusion is. Basically, plausibility illusion are events that correlate with your action and relate personally to you. So in this case, this participant is just reading a set of questions from a laptop, but then the avatar was really answering those questions, and it's the kind of answers she gave, the way she has, was really quite personal towards this participant. And when this happens, it really gives people a strong feeling that whatever is happening in VR is real, and they're actually playing a big part of these events. So there's also obviously the embodied illusion, which is also really important in VR. But I think in terms of, in the scope of today's talk, I'm going to leave it out for now. So what is virtual reality? Virtual reality, for me, are the two illusions: place illusion, the illusion of being there, and plausibility illusion, the illusion of events happening in VR are real, and the virtual character in VR you are interacting with actually cares about you. Whatever you do to them matters, and they actually give you appropriate responses. And so this is actually easier sort of said than done. It's actually a big technical challenge to actually program the virtual characters to give you the impression they're reacting towards you, because technically, we're not really there yet. But I think Marco will explain more on this front. I just want to finish my first part with another couple more videos. So the first one is a really interesting way to show how VR has been used now. I now do this game on a daily basis. I think Marco is a big fan of this game as well. So the reason why I'm showing this game is this is a Beat Saber game. You go in, you just cut cubes with your saber, with your lightsaber, and then you actually have this haptic feedback. So the input here is users' arm movement and users' sort of position as well, which is quite explicit, because you see a cube coming, you have to put your arm there and slash them. And the feedback you have is visual. You can see the cube being slashed, and it's also haptic, because you have that sort of haptic feedback of your hand, which together works out really well. But when you have this, I'm showing this video because it really gives you a really nice sense of how much this guy is enjoying himself, but at the same time how ridiculous it might have seemed in real life without the actual sort of virtual reality displays. And then I also want to then going back to what we're talking about today is about interactions with virtual characters. So what does plausibility illusion mean when we have characters involved? So comparing to the previous example, virtual interaction with virtual characters is a lot more subtle. It's basically very subtle interpersonal communication cues you're using. Obviously, there's the verbal side, but very, very importantly, there is the nonverbal side as well. So the input here is the user's whole body, right? So, like in lots of games, we're just using players' head and hands as input, right? So it's very clearly defined. But when you're interacting with a virtual character, it's more implicit. So maybe, how you move your body, if you're feeling anxious, you're feeling confidence, if you are being more inclusive, you're feeling a bit, like shy, these are all things you can express with your body. And this can then be used as input to facilitate the social conversation you're having with an agent. And in terms of the feedback, is character animation or audio. But no, probably not haptics in this case, because although in lots of social VR apps I tried, you can go high five people. But to be honest, unless you're interacting with someone you're quite intimate with, the chances are in real life you don't actually sort of have lots of bodily touch each other. So so that's on that note. I think I should pass it on to Marco. I just want to show you the final slides from my part. This is my student Christina in her Vive headset. So I just want to say that very importantly, VR is not just a display. Very importantly, it gives very rich and high-dimensional real-time data, which we can use to drive real-time interaction in VR. And that's really, really important because we don't really have sort of best practice of how to do it yet. There are lots of research work in this area, but I think we're still at infancy. And I just want to also mention that other than the sort of 3 tracking data we're getting out of HTC Vive, so Vive, for instance, themselves, they're already having sort of eye tracking devices which you can put in the headset, and lip tracking which you can put underneath the headset to track your whole face as well. And with Vive, you can buy other kind of trackers to put on your body. So there is more and more richer user input you can get in real time in VR, and there's so much we can do with those inputs. And on that note, I think I'm passing it back on to Marco by stop sharing my screen. You're muted, Marco.
Yes, thank you. And so I'm going to sort of move on, and Sylvia has talked quite a lot about, the importance of interactivity in virtual reality. I'm going to talk a little bit about how do we achieve this at a technical level. So I'm going to share my slides. Okay, so what we're really looking at is this: the interaction between a real person and a virtual person. So how do we create this kind of interaction that feels real? And really bearing in mind Sylvia's important point that, VR isn't just about display. It isn't just about what the character is doing. It's about the interaction between the two. And that's very much how a real social interaction is as well. What matters is not just the behavior as we talk, but how we respond to other people. So what we actually need is a kind of loop between the real person and the virtual person. So the virtual person, our VR environment has to sense what the real person is doing, understand it, interpret the sensory data, formulate a response, so do some behavior that is in response to whatever the real person is doing, animate that behavior, and then the real person will in turn respond to whatever the virtual person is doing, and we get this loop. So, in a sense, there's two sort of, channels going on here. First is the sort of sensing, understanding what the virtual person is doing, and the second is generating behavior. And actually, our technologies for generating behavior, they're not perfect, but they're quite mature. We have great animation systems, we have mocap systems, we have game engines which can, do complex blends and generative motion. Lots of quite good stuff there. Certainly stuff that we've had in the first part of this tutorial. Where we're a bit more behind, and a problem that's actually more challenging is the top level of how do we sense and understand what a real person is doing. So starting there, let's have a look at what we actually get out of a VR system. So, this is Christina again exemplifying the sort of the physical bodily nature of it. And we have a lot of data that we can get out. So any VR system will have some form of head tracking. Normally now there's going to be a 6 degrees of freedom so we can find the position and the rotation of the head. And importantly, we can also get the velocity, so the changes. So that's very good for detecting something like a head nod, for example. The hands are tracked, so we know if somebody's doing gestures or any other hand movement. We can pick up the voice from a microphone. That's a fairly, old-fashioned technology. Newer devices have eye tracking, more complex sensors and physiological sensors, that might pick up heart rate and other variables which could give insights into emotion. So there's quite a lot of data. And then some of the systems I'm going to be talking about actually use other data like facial expression from video that you typically wouldn't have in a consumer level VR setup. But essentially there's a lot of different data and we need to integrate that. And I'll talk a bit about a couple of different contexts in which we're doing that. So what we're basically looking at here is social interaction and in particular non-verbal behavior. So we talk about body language. So I'm not really an expert on the linguistic side. I'll touch on it. So generating speech, something that you would get with Anonymous and Alexa. I'm looking at what you don't get with an Alexa or a Siri, which is body language, gestures, facial expression. And I'll start off with listening behavior. So this is where you have a character that you can talk to as a real person, and the character will respond to you, realistically and give appropriate feedback. That's something that we call the back channel. So the kind of feedback that we give. So I might, if I'm talking, you might say, yeah, or you might nod your head or smile. And, there are a variety of systems like this. I've created a character that is able to sort of respond to tone of voice using machine learning method. I'll come back to in a minute. This is the Semaine system that's developing what's called the sensitive artificial listener. So this is a character that can pick up a wide variety of cues from the voice, facial expression, and movement of a real person who's talking, and produce appropriate feedback behavior in real time, but also does that with a bunch of different personalities. So I think this character here is a bit of a grumpy character, whereas there's a much friendlier character. So we can see not only that we can generate this behavior, but we can vary them in appropriate ways. And then there's the rapport systems developed so the Semaine was a large European project with a large number of partners who I won't mention here. You can find that in the paper. This is a system developed by the University of Southern California Institute for Creative Technologies. And I'll show this twice, but in this context, what I'm interested in is that it's, again, looking at various signals, facial expressions, voice, and trying to create appropriate back-channel feedback that will give you a good sense of rapport. So you're building a relationship with a character that you feel you trust. And I'll come to back to this character in a minute, but this character is a therapist, so it's a virtual therapist. So it's very important that people trust her. So what's required here? Well, when we go to sensing, most of these systems use some vocal features. I don't mean the content of speech. So generally these systems ignore the text of what's being said and look at tone of voice, emotion, pauses. These things are very important, and you can do quite a lot of appropriate feedback based just on these without knowing what's actually being said. Think about if you've been given directions in a foreign country and you don't really speak the language and you have no idea what the person is saying, but you're able to nod and smile and be polite without really understanding. There are other important features. Pauses in speech, I guess, is a vocal feature, but it's a very important one. And also gaze. So whether we're looking at somebody or not looking at somebody is a key important measure in this kind of non-verbal behavior. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. And what kind of feedback do we give? I've mentioned head nods. That's a classic feedback of agreement, but also encourage continuing. Also smile, very important positive feedback. And also sort of vocalizations like And in more complex situations, you might use facial expression to indicate less positive features. So, I mean, you can indicate disagreement, but also another very important back channel is confusion. If you haven't understood what's said, and that's often carried in facial expression. So yeah, these are all called the back channel behavior. Now, one of the challenges of all these kind of behaviors is that human behavior is very complex. There's a lot of, in all of these, verbal signals that you can interpret, and, as human beings, we can effortlessly understand them, but that doesn't mean we actually know how we do it. It is largely tacit embodied knowledge in that, we do this thing subconsciously without fully understanding or being able to explain in language how to do that. And the fact that we don't explain it, and even if you're a social neuroscientist, I work with a lot of social neuroscientists, it's still at the scientific level, still not terribly well understood. Even if you can't explain it, how do you program it? And one of the solutions here is, rather than trying to explicitly program algorithms, is to use machine learning. So I'm going to talk through some work I've done, quite a long time ago, about, using machine learning as a way of accessing this kind of listening behavior. So what you do is you start off with recording data of two people interacting. We've recently got a project with the University College London Institute of Cognitive Neuroscience, where we're recording a large data set of conversations. You record that data and synchronize that data. So you have not just data of an individual, but you have data of the interaction between two individuals. And you can use this interaction data to learn a mapping from one person's behavior to another person's behavior. So this is, ignore the actual machine learning system, that's quite an old slide, and I'll talk about a newer one that we've been doing more recently. But once you can map from one person's behavior, i.e. the real person, to the other person's, the virtual person, then you can use these kind of models for generating nonverbal behavior and generating that kind of interaction loop I was talking about in a previous slide. So this is, this is a sort of, most of the systems I've talked about just now all use this kind of machine learning approach in some way or other. And I'll talk about in detail of an example of that. So this is a little example of my work. Is the audio here? Sorry. Apologies, everyone. Just give me a minute. There's an unpleasant interaction between the functionality of Google Slides and the size of my screen. Is my screen still shared? Okay. I hope it is. So here's the. So this is an example of a character that's been trained to respond to vocal features. In fact, very, very simple features of tone and voice. So you can see that even with quite simple features, we've got, the character can change its behavior based on what I'm doing and pick out features like that. So this is an example, and there are many more sophisticated ones than what I've talked about. So that's one way, that's a listening behavior. And I think that's, it's a really important one, I think. And it's interesting because you can get it to work without having to understand all of the text. But obviously, our conversations are two-way, and it's really important to look at the verbal behavior, so what's actually being said. So how do we use language understanding to bring this in? So I'm going to, again, talk about a few examples. So Sylvia is going to mention this work in a minute. So this is about doing simulations or medical training. In this context, we had a pre-recorded conversational script, and we had a human being acting as a Wizard of Oz, so behind the scenes triggering appropriate responses to what a person was saying. So that's one approach, which gets around the complex technology of natural language processing, but there are a number of others. So this is Sarah. This is a virtual conversational agent that is able to answer questions and define an interaction. She's part of Justine Castell's lab at Carnegie Mellon. Justine has been one of the pioneers in this area for decades, really, certainly since I got started. And this, again, I mentioned this Sim Sensei, this virtual therapist, because I was talking about how she has very excellent listening behavior, but she also has conversational behavior. So here, you, as well as everything I've said previously, you need to look at speech, but also other non-verbal factors such as facial expression and gaze to understand what's being said. So, you're not just picking up the textual content, you're picking up some of the emotional content. And some features like gaze are really important for not the content of the speech, but the management of the speech. So one of the amazing things about social interaction is that we're able to effortlessly take turns and switch between one person talking and another in a tiny amount of time with almost no gap between us. And which means that we're effectively having some kind of predictive model of what's going on. And non-verbal behavior is very important there, and gaze is a very key part of that. And what we're generating is speech, but also gestures, which are very closely connected to speech, and also other features like gaze. So let's have a quick look at what that might look like. So there's a whole load of stuff that we could be doing here. So from the top, proxemics is how we use space, how close we stand to one another. That personal space, very important. How we shift our postures. There's theories that, we coordinate shifts in posture, gaze, eye contact, super important. I'll talk about that in a sec. Some of the back channel features like head nods, but also some of the, front channel, the main channel features like speech is obvious, gestures accompany speech. So gestures are closely connected to speech. We might have some specific scripted actions within a conversation, facial expressions, and obviously that includes lip synchronization. So the facial has to correspond to the lip movement has to correspond to the speech. Now we can do some of these at quite a low level reactive way. So, if we're shifting postures, we can react fairly instantly if we detect a posture shift. Similarly, if somebody steps closer, we can respond in terms of personal space. Gaze, we need to look at the head, so that's respond to head tracking. Similarly, we can respond quite rapidly to voice, in terms of gaze, but also head nods, speech. And then there are quite a slightly slower deliberative response where, we have to have more complex behaviors like, generating the speech, triggering specific actions, generating gestures that accompany that speech. So, we need to have two processes that are going on, and we can hypothesize that about real humans, but we definitely need that in virtual humans. So that can be driven by quite a complex natural language dialogue engine, but in some cases, actually, the selection of speech could be done by a human controller. So to get rid of that, I want to talk about we've been talking about very complex techniques, but some of these, particularly the reactive techniques, can be quite simple. So gaze behavior, you can generate, it can be extremely complex, but we can generate it quite simply based on whether we're talking or not. So one of the basic results is that we look more when we're listening to somebody speaking than when we're the person speaking. So by modulating the amount of gaze we're looking at the other person, based on whether we're speaking or not, already have quite a realistic model. And just that alternation between looking and not looking generates an appropriate speech. We never look at the other person, it's disconnected. So constantly looking at the other person is unnerving. So we need to get that appropriate switch between looking and not looking. But these systems can get pretty complex. So this is the Sarah system I mentioned from Justine Gisselle's lab. These diagrams can be a little bit daunting, and I don't need you to look at everything, but just to sort of unpack it a little bit. You have complex systems for understanding the text, the vocal signals, both verbal and non-verbal. We have a camera that recognizes facial expressions and these non-verbal features. These all feed into a dialogue management system. So you need to keep track of what has been said already, what the state of the dialogue is. So, are you agreeing with somebody? What questions have been asked? Then this needs to feed into a speech generation system that is, that's reliant on a knowledge base, a database of world knowledge, and also a non-verbal generation system that can generate, based on the speech that's being created, gestures and other non-verbal content. So these are the various components, and different systems use them in different ways. So, that's a very quick overview of quite a complex field, which is how we can generate and interactive virtual characters. Now, we're going to switch over to doing a couple of case studies, which look at how we can apply some of these ideas in practice and the responses they get. So we're going to start with a case study of medical training, and I'll hand over to Sylvia for that.
Hi, thank you, Marco. So here I am again. Right. So all this, thanks a lot for, the amazing sort of explanation. Actually, when I met Marco, he was kind of just starting to develop. We disappear. Okay, here we go. He's just to develop this kind of line of research, and I was really, really interested. But at the same time, I also have the burning question: is does it actually work, and what kind of application, and in which this kind of this kind of real life, real time interaction you have with the characters can be best used. So here I'm going to start a case study that we developed in the lab about. Why is this back? Sorry. I'm just going to go back here. I think this should be the first slide. So I'm just going to talk about two studies we conducted in the lab. One is wrong slides again. One is about antibiotics prescription, another one about child abuse. I'm going to start with the antibiotics prescription one. So, so forget about VR, forget about virtual characters for a minute. So antibiotics, superbugs, they are big problems. So we kind of all know that bioscience is still the most important science, and medical science is the most important science, have the biggest impact on human life. But basically at the time when we started this work in 2015 or 14, 13, we were approached by medical doctors. We asked them, hey, what is, one of the biggest problems you want us to solve with sort of GP communication? We went through a few cases, and then I was really interested in this one. So basically, we all know that the overuse of antibiotics produces superbugs. Superbugs are antibiotic-resistant bugs, and they're basically a slowly emerging disaster. And by 2050, if we don't do anything, superbugs would kill about 10 million people a year. More people will die from superbugs than cancer, and even sort of ordinary work like gardening or childbirth will be actually really high risk. You go to the hospital, you might actually catch superbugs, and there is nothing the hospital can do other than your own immune system. Sorry for bringing this topic again. Now I feel very sad of bringing this in the middle of the pandemic. But anyway, so one of the problems with the overuse of antibiotics is the overprescription of antibiotics. Right? So all the medical doctors in the UK, like we have something called GP, general practitioners, so like the family doctors in the US. So they are basically the ones who normally prescribe antibiotics when you're ill. You go to them and describe your symptoms, and they decide whether this is a case appropriate for antibiotics or not. Because if it's not, then they should restrict as much as possible. So basically, we designed a scenario. I think it's actually this side. So the problem we have is that GP often overprescribe antibiotics because it's sometimes hard to say no. And if you have someone who is sick and they feel that antibiotics will help them, they'll really push you for that. And the GP sometimes they have quite a hectic schedule. They have 10 to 15 minutes per patient, and sometimes they just give in. It's always easier to give in and prescribe antibiotics than not. So our hypothesis here is that can we actually use VR as a training tool for GP to practice their communication skills? Not only to say, hey, you can't have antibiotics, but also say it in a way that the patients would actually be happy with, right? And also we're interested in if more experienced GP will actually be better at saying no to unreasonable antibiotics demands, because that will be an assumption you have, in real life. You say if you're more experienced, maybe better at saying no. But can we actually prove that VR will have the same result? If it does, then it means that VR is a good simulation for the stress, for the communication, and we can then look at using that for training. Okay, so we designed this scenario where we had an old woman coming in with a cough, but there's no other medical reasons to be prescribed antibiotics. But she came here with her daughter, who is really angry. She's about to go on holiday. She doesn't want to leave her mom without antibiotics because she thinks that will really, fix whatever she's having. We also had a medical assistant there in case there's some, because we can't actually, ask the medical doctor to run a temperature test on the patient. So we have the medical assistant there who will intervene, saying, "Hey, we've got her temperature already," blah blah blah. Right, so that's the scenario. And in terms of interaction, it will be amazing to use everything Marco has mentioned. But in our case, we actually want to test if VR works in this situation. I really want a high level of plausibility illusion. So I don't want to sort of venture too much into kind of using autonomous interaction. And I have really never tried an interaction where I was fully convinced it is another human being behind it. So in this case, we use this Wizard of Oz platform, the control panel. But this is not something super easy. So it's not just something we sit down and designed it. No, it took us up at least 2 months to kind of first have the idea, write the first version of the script, and actually outreach medical doctors and practice script with them, see if the script does cover everything. And then once we have everything all programmed, the motion captured or done, we then have to train a research assistant to actually press the buttons to make sure they trigger things quickly and appropriately. And that normally takes about a day with a sort of conversation with this level of complexity. Okay, so I'm going to show you a video of how the interaction actually went. Hopefully that will work.
Right.
It started just like this. A couple of days of sore throat, then a cough. But then she became really very ill with a high temperature fever. I had to take a day off work to the hospital. They gave her antibiotics and she immediately got better. So all she needs is some antibiotics this time.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. But what we often see is with this kind of illness, things settle down by themselves. In the most case, it sounds like you had a bad experience last time, but I think it would be worth trying some simple treatments like painkillers and some fluids and some rest first.
I'll just ask your daughter if she knows about whether you've been coughing up any phlegm or not. Do you know?
Why do we need to wait until things get worse? Our immune system is not very strong, as you can see. There's no point letting her suffer through this. All we need is some antibiotics.
Sure, no, I understand that, and if the reason I'm asking these extra questions, and I know you're in a hurry, but the reason I'm asking these questions is because actually, very often, a cough is caused by a virus rather than a bacteria.
Even if it is just a virus, isn't it better that we give her some antibiotics to help her immune system?
Well, unfortunately, that's not how antibiotics work. They don't. They don't boost the immune system.
Please, can you give us the antibiotic prescription now? And we will only use it if things get worse.
As I say, I don't think that's necessary right now. Sometimes we can do delayed prescriptions, but I've examined your mum right now and she looks fine to me, and I think this is a virus.
Doctor, maybe you can give us the prescription, but we will only collect it if my mum gets worse.
Okay, it seems like that's something you're both absolutely fixed on having. We can arrange for a prescription that you can pick up tomorrow or the next day if things are getting worse.
Reassuring as I can, I do not think that there
This
is...
is so unfair. It's going to ruin our holiday. I'm going to take this up with the local health authority. I think you are unfairly denying medicine to my mother.
Okay, I appreciate your concern. Thank you for your feedback. I do think that the best medical practice at the moment is to manage this conservatively for now.
My mother worked and paid national health insurance all her life. Now look at what's happening.
Sure, I mean this has got in no way to do with your mother's health insurance payments. I believe this is the best medical practice at the moment for your mum. I think the use of antibiotics in terms of the risk and the side effects that they can produce, such as resistance to future chest infections or problems with the stomach, mean that it's probably better to not prescribe them and to seek medical attention in France should things get worse, which I'm not
They say
expecting.
on the news that old people are just invisible, not treated with.
Okay, you get the point. Basically, if you don't give her antibiotics, she comes up with one excuse after another, and then it could go on and on for quite a bit of time. But some doctors did manage to say no towards the end as well. So before I show the next slide, which is our result, I'm just going to steal one line Marco also always use whenever he describes this work. So in this case, we had medical doctors and trainee doctors who come in and go through the experience, and they know that they're not dealing with real patients. They know they're dealing with virtual patients, and also they all have the medical knowledge that this is a clear case in which antibiotics shouldn't be prescribed. And they know that on top of that, they know they're being watched and videotaped. Someone is evaluating their behavior, their performance in not prescribing antibiotics, right? So in the case, it should be, quite straightforward. You just need to be able to come up with excuses, just say no towards the end. That's really a simple task with a very clear goal. But let's see how they perform. So with all the participants we had 9 trainee GPs and 12 more experienced GPs. And when we go through the video clips of whether they said yes or no, actually none of the trainee GPs said no. So they all basically gave in at some point. And 4 out of the more experienced GP managed to say no. So there's basically an indication that the experience does actually play a factor here. But also really interesting to see that, despite all the, nothing is real and your task is to say no, the majority of participants actually failed that task, basically. Right. So some comments, it felt stressful as I felt the character were putting me under pressure to make a decision to prescribe. It's really useful for testing how you respond to difficult situations. Would be useful to try again using different consultation techniques. Frequently see patients demanding a particular treatment who won't take no for an answer. So the medical doctors really, really appreciate what we've done. We actually, had other people approaching us, want to do similar study, and that's why we have done our second study, which is on child safeguarding. So first of all, a bit of background. So we all know how important it is to for child safeguarding. Anyone who suspects a child has been abused at home should definitely, approach local authorities or someone as soon as possible. But it's not always easy. So for instance, in the UK, we all know that A&E doctors, they are very much aware that whenever they see a child have any sort of injury and ended up in A&E, they take it very seriously. They go through a set of child abuse related questions to rule out any potential harm the child might be experiencing. But actually, not all child abuse ended up in A&E, and some of them are suffering from minor injuries or psychological abuse. That is really, really hard for anyone who is not really inside the family to flag that up. So medical doctors, especially general practitioners, actually play a very important role in raising safeguarding concerns in this situation. But this is something, again, really difficult to practice, right? And medical doctors are very familiar with something called simulation, and by actually simulation, they meant practicing with the actor. Not only they do that in medical schools, but they sometimes have continued professional development courses in that as well, just to make sure they're updated on their sort of communication skills. But you can't actually use a real child actor to pretend they have been abused, especially if they're under the age of 12 or 8, right? So even younger than that. It's really, really, it's not even ethical just to tell the child actor to act that way. And that's why we think, potentially is a really interesting area to explore how to basically implement that with virtual reality. So we implemented this situation and sort of with child abuse cues carefully animated in there. And we didn't come up with this ourselves. We worked with Professor Caroline Futterman, who wrote the child protection practice manual. So she's really a sort of leading expert in this area. And this is one of the animations we had.
He'll be quiet, right, Tom? Tom, sit here.
I don't know what's going on in this boy's head.
So I think it could be quite clear to a lot of you that there is something weird going on with this father and the child, right? But this is not kind of the complete story. So in the VR experiment, first of all, it was conducted in the cave-like system, so that the medical doctors can also have access to a laptop so that they can type their notes in. And then they have this father with his son coming in. And so in the situation, in the actual experiment, the setting is that the father had a really complex medical condition. So the GPs find it actually quite difficult to handle. They have to read two really complex recommendation letters, which basically are sort of conflicting each other, and they have to then communicate with the patient to try to, decide which recommendation they take. So it is quite both cognitively loaded and emotionally loaded as well, because it was two really difficult, life-threatening surgical procedure the father has to decide with the medical doctor. So as exactly as we expected, lots of them didn't actually notice there's something more serious or something really serious going on between the father and the child. And again, we didn't actually take what they say they've seen. Instead, our measurement is the medical notes they actually type up on the laptop after they go through the consultation, just like to do in a real life consultation. You see the patients, you now have 5 minutes to type up your notes, right? So we don't tell them what this consultation is about. They go through it, just as it happens in real life. And then we get their medical notes. We had 63 participants in this study, and we get their medical notes, and then we found 10 independent raters to go through their medical notes and give a score between 0 and 100 in terms of their awareness of child safeguarding issues and the development of some strategy to address these concerns. So if they have these notes, these points in their notes, then it's a higher mark. If you don't have many of those notes, or some of them didn't even mention there was a child in the consultation, they'll probably receive a 0 score. Right, so that's our dependent variable. And we also collected independent variable, including the doctor's experience, their self-reported stress level, and their big 5 personality. So what we found is that we actually this time didn't find any correlation between trainee and GP trainees. We also didn't see any correlation between their year of practice and how well they perform. So this on its own is less really experience-based. But at the same time, we did find really interesting result in terms of stress level and personality. So in particular, we find that the y-axis here is perceived stress scales, how stressful they feel, and the y-axis is the quality of their note. So what we found is there's a significant negative correlation between how stressed they actually feel and the quality of their note. So the more stressed, the worse they are at identifying child abuse issues. And then our next result is the big 5 personalities. If you focus on agreeableness, extroversion, and neuroticism, so basically their quality of notes is positively related to their agreeableness and extroversion, but negatively related to neuroticism. So that's something really interesting that, without virtual reality, it's more difficult to have findings like this one. I think that's probably, so some comments, they're impressed, evoked a sense of discomfort within me, which is difficult to do in an artificial setting. And maybe look at the last one as well. The VR really had a role in easing med students into training consultation skills, perhaps without being observed by as a private tool. So they really appreciate what they've done. But in their case, we had the same thing. We had a research assistant in the room at the same time, basically pressing buttons to trigger responses from the virtual characters, which is, I think, for our next step is really to move on from that. So just a brief conclusion before I go further into that point. So I feel that we have collected enough evidence that people do react towards virtual characters as if they were real, despite they don't even look real sometimes. They're not photorealistic, and the animation is not done 100%, motion capture. It really works, and it's really useful for research and training for medical doctor communications. And I also want to emphasize, I think it works because we really put lots of effort in designing the script, in making sure that whatever is happening really sort of support a strong level of plausibility illusion, which I think is really important. And also it's about skill transferable as well. If you're talking about training and therapy, you're you're talking about whatever you learn from VR can actually be applied in real life as well, right? So I think in that sense, plausible evolution is really, really important. And in terms of future work, just going back to the point I mentioned, because we have now collected with this study 63 conversations between, medical doctors and our research assistants selection from all these sort of pre-existing buttons we have. So I don't think it's going to be a huge amount of work to actually make the whole process autonomous in terms of achieving a similar result as we're having now. So if anyone who know a lot about natural language processing and actually interested in interactive Unity applications, please let me know. I'm very interested in actually just use data we have and try to see how we can we actually have something autonomous. And secondly, what I think is really missing now is that lots of medical doctors, after going through this, they really suggest, I actually want to be rewarded if I'm doing well. So for instance, if I'm really listening to my patients, I'm giving, all the verbal or the nonverbal cues to my patient. I want this patient to kind of appreciate my effort by also maybe disclosing more of their symptoms and things like that. But I think on that note, I'll pass it on to Marco, because that's exactly what we sort of made the first step with the project Marco is going to talk about. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides and mute myself.
Okay, so what I'm going to talk about now is another project we've recently finished, which was an opportunity to take some of the research I've been talking about, or we've both been talking about, and put it into into practice in the games industry. So games and sort of narrative virtual reality, really obvious application area here, where we can really see characters that are engaging, and the ability to have rich, realistic characters can take the narratives and take the stories of games to another level of social reality beyond the sort of the stereotypes of shooting or puzzle solving. And in particular, VR is very good for this because, there's a really strong, as Sylvia's examples have all shown, a really strong sensation of co-presence, really with another interactive character. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this project, and here we are. So this was this was a collaborative project funded by Innovate UK, which is a funding body in the UK that funds commercial research. So it was a collaborative commercial research project with two games companies, Maze Theory, with the lead there being Russell Harding, who you can see in the black shirt, and Dream Reality Interactive, led by Jade Ranyard, whose skin isn't really that colour in real life. And in particular, it was collaborative with us, and the main person who worked on this, and most of this work is by Christina Dolbre, who we've seen earlier in looking very sort of active in VR, but she's a PhD student at Goldsmiths who had an internship she was seconded to Dream Reality to work on this. And this was a project to build convincing interactive virtual characters to fit in the game. And in particular, it was a game based around a TV program called Peaky Blinders, which I'm not sure if you will have heard of it, depending on where you're from, but it's very, very big in the UK. It's a sort of post-First World War gangster gangster series set mostly in the city of Birmingham. I want to sort of look at, I've talked a little bit about some of the research applications that we've had in VR, and most of them are focused on the virtual character's role of listening to a user and understanding a user. So they could be the passive listeners, the sensitive artificial listeners I've talked about that respond to body language, or they could be fully interpreting the user's speech and doing natural language processing. Neither of these really fit very well with a games or narrative context. So you could say, so one reason very simply is, this has to ship to thousands of people with varying accents, with varying microphones, with varying noise levels in their room. And, simple speech understanding is going to be very challenging. But I think there's actually a deeper point about the narrative, which is that it's not actually, the narrative can't be driven just by questions and answers from the player. You really need the characters to take the lead in the exposition. Otherwise, at one level, you're asking the players to do a lot. You're asking the players to be a character in a narrative and come up with good dialogue. And also, if you just give a lot of freedom to the player, they're going to take the narrative, they're going to ask questions that are not relevant to the narrative. So in a game situation, what you actually are looking for is the player to be a listener and the character to lead most of the dialogue, which is going to be high quality scripted dialogue, and the player to be responding to that, but to be taking account of that responses, and the character to be a speaker, but one that responds to what the player is doing. So this is an example. So what we did is we basically set up a character. This is a sort of demo character we used for data collection. So this is not the final game. I have to sort of, there's lots of caveats to say this doesn't represent footage from the Peaky Blinders game. This is a test which was inspired by the Peaky Blinders setting, but this is really a bespoke scenario we created to test this, and in particular collect data from people to use with machine learning, which I'll come to in a minute.
They've built apartments on it now.
So this is a character giving a monologue.
Can I ever go there? I wonder what happened to all the finches. Maybe they found a new home. Do you think they would have found a new home? No. They're like me. You're looking for somewhere else to call home. I often imagine them happy in some other park, but the image doesn't come naturally to my mind, so it can't be true.
So it's quite an emotional story. There's no verbal interaction from the player. The player is simply listening to it, but it's very important. What the player is doing can radically change what happens in these contexts. So now I'm going to talk about, I showed a slide earlier which has a pipeline of recording data and training machine learning. I'm going to put this, show it in what we did in this particular context. So we recorded data of a number of players interacting with this virtual character. And we had that in various different settings. So one of the issues with doing this in gaming is that naturally, in a game, we're not used to sort of fully engaging with characters socially. So an instinct of a gamer might be to explore the room zone out of this character talking. So you might sort of wander around as she's talking, picking things up, looking at them, which is extremely socially rude, but it doesn't really matter in most game contexts because the characters don't get offended. In some ways, what we don't want to do is create a character that does get offended if you're rude to her. So in order to make sure, that we've got training data of characters, of players being typical, gamers and not paying attention to characters, actually paying attention to character, we gave them 3 tasks. The first time they did it, we just let them loose, see what they did. The second time they did it, we said, you have to gain the trust of this character. So you have to, you have to make sure she trusts you, that she likes you. And the final option was that you have to memorize what objects there are in the room. So you have to sort of get acquainted with the various objects in the room. And the idea here was that, to make people explicitly ignore the character so that we're, and pay attention to the room. And the idea is that's giving us lots of different kind of training data to detect people paying attention and not paying attention. Once we've collected this data, then because we're looking at something that's quite subjective and subconscious, is the character engaged with, is the player engaged with the virtual character? There isn't a sort of objective measure for this. So we used an expert annotations to say at what point is the player being engaged, not engaged. Then the next stage was to use this data, this synchronized data, to train a model. Now, I won't get too much details here, but we're essentially using a reinforcement learning approach to train a policy. So the idea is, rather than simply training a classifier, we're training a model that can generate new behavior based on old behavior. And this is typically done with kind of games where, you have a correct answer, you have a win state, and you can train, the classic examples are, AlphaGo, which is learning to play Go, and it gets a reward whenever it wins a game and punishment whenever it loses. Now, we don't have such straightforward rewards and punishment. So instead, we're using a method called generative adversarial imitation learning, which is basically, it learns how to, it basically is used to generate rewards, which will train an algorithm to imitate the data. So we've got a correct answer, we've got correct performances. We want to then train the model to copy that. And once we've got that trained model, we can actually apply it and create a character that can respond in real time. So how did this all work? So we collected data of a real person interacting with a virtual character. We then played that back inside a virtual environment and got an annotator who could be a game developer to just annotate whether the person's engaged or not engaged. And then we use that to train. And so I'm just going to show a little bit of an example here. So this is one of the participants interacting with the character. And you see, this is one of the more engaged characters. He's actually reaching up to touch, lead the character and sort of try and comfort her and giving some good non-verbal responses. In other contexts, you could have seen people just wandering around picking up objects, which would have been relevant. So this is an example of taking some of the research pipelines that we might have been developing 10 years ago and applying it and using this. And this should be featured in the Peaky Blinders game, which should be coming out later this year. I don't know if it's going to take place of it or not. So that's was a great possibility for us that we were able to apply some of our research in real time, but it also shows that there's some of the differences that need to happen. So how to fit in with narrative, that it's not really about understanding and listening to characters, it's really about story exposition, and also the fact that gamers aren't used to social interaction, so we always have to train them to respond in a normal social way. Okay, so that's my bit. I'm going to hand back to Sylvia, who's going to say last few words. But if you could please, on the YouTube, there's a bit of a delay. So if you could please just post any questions you have now, and then we'll come back to that in a minute.
Okay, I just wanted to say if you're interested in anything related to VR, I'm helping to run a sort of a VR seminar now with Frontiers in Virtual Reality. And we were not so professional at setting them up with our official YouTube channels. I'm just using my own YouTube channel. And we have a few talks already, including a panel discussion on using XR to bring people together. And this Wednesday, we'll have UI of X talk about haptics for VR. And you should, if you're interested in VR, they're all on YouTube channel, and there'll be more coming as well. You can see if you've been doing research in VR, you see lots of really big names here. So and also Michael and I, we have this Coursera course. Well, actually, this figure is not right. We have about 30,000 learners internationally already. So if you don't know anything about virtual reality but really interested in starting this area, I think this is a good course. We have reviews as well on Coursera, especially with the lockdown. This is a material we designed specific for online learning. So it's not just like a seminar. We really have all sorts of interactive activities to facilitate learning in this case. And also, if you actually want to spend a year learning VR in London, which is a fantastic place to learn virtual reality, because we really benefited from being able to collaborate with lots of people in the creative industry, and lots of them are located in London. And so we run this MAMSC virtual and augmented reality at Goldsmiths, University of London as well. So that's just a bit of advertisement I'm trying to plug in the end. I think I'm just going to try to bring everybody back to answer questions if you have any.
Shall I sort of kick off again? I think it's the thing that's on everybody's mind is the lockdown and COVID, and you mentioned it slightly at the beginning. So how do you think, is there anything that sort of VR and virtual characters can do to help with our current situation?
Can I first say something? I mean, I had lots of we just had a VR gathering yesterday in Rec Room where we were playing all sorts of weird games with my students, and I got really annoyed because there was so much at those games than I could possibly be. So I left really quickly. And I just say that I think I'm having Zoom fatigue. But I think VR is definitely our addition to Zoom meetings. I think they use this stimulates different areas of your brain, which is really needed. I mean, the other day I had a conversation with my neighbor 2 meters apart. That's, the reason policy in the UK allows that. But at some point, the two of us just couldn't remember some important names. And I realized it's because we haven't spoke to another human being. Well, I mean, I spoke to my family members, right? But it's not the same way to socially just, have conversations with other people. And I feel my brain is working in a different way now. And I do think, maybe virtual characters could be useful in this sense. I mean, on my daily life, I play Beat Saber, but I also use this app called Dance Central. So I dance with a virtual agent. And I wouldn't say it replaces the experience of going to the gym to dance classes, because that's what I normally do. But I do feel that, when I'm hitting all the marks and there is people cheering for me, I feel good. So I feel, at least in that sense, just to maintain, I think mental health will be a big problem next year, even after COVID. And I think there's a lot that can be done in this, especially with mental health issues. Sometimes people have a problem with disclosure, they don't actually want anybody to know that they're experiencing anything. But with virtual agent, I think we can provide a lot of help, which nobody needs to intervene, and it could be just sort of free support. And I think it's I definitely see lots of use case the next couple of years, and after that as well.
Okay, if anybody wants to ask a question, please chat, post on the YouTube chat. I'm not seeing anything, so...
Yeah, actually, I want to ask a question with, maybe for Marco, but then all of you as well. So do you think, because Marco, I know you're a gamer, right? Do you think in terms of game mechanics, we try to use user engagement as a game mechanic, which in the beginning, we were not, they were not very convinced for, some of the developers, but then, how can you use shooting as game mechanics? And that's fine, but not use player engagement. So, Marco, do you think that will become, at some point, a kind of main breakthrough with games? And how do you think gamer will react to what we've done, what many other amazing people have done in this area?
I mean, I think to me, it's about, I think VR will fundamentally change how we play games, because it's much more embodied medium. I think we're, with as long ago as the Nintendo Wii, we started moving away from just clicking buttons and to using our whole body movements. But I think that is inevitable with VR. I mean, it just is much more natural. When you mentioned Beat Saber and Dance Central, these are really good examples. And I think the next level is definitely, and it's still much harder, and we've been working on for years, and it's not a solved problem for us, is that sort of how this integrates with narrative games and games with characters in. So I think it will change a lot. But I think it will open up many different demographics. So I think each time you're seeing innovations within the games industry in the last couple of decades, from smartphone interaction, which is much easier to use, to the Wii body interaction, you're expanding the demographic. And I think that's that's going to be both, one of the most interesting things, one of the biggest benefits for game developers, but also I think it's, it isn't just about convincing the gamers who already play games, and game players are very diverse now. It's not. It's easy to get stuck in stereotypes, but there isn't a sort of single gamer demographic. But I think the more you can have rich character-driven experiences and narratives, the more it's going to interest people who wouldn't have been interested in games before and would have gone to film and novels.
Yeah. For me, it's very much about natural interactions. For instance, yesterday I was playing with this paintball game, but I just get so confused. One of the buttons is drop my gun. The other one is to teleport. I just get confused of which one is which, So I just, the reason why I love Beat Saber is I don't have to think. Mm-hmm. There is the red for left, blue for right, which I have to think a little bit, but that's okay. Except that's the level complexity of the game, but not like when you press buttons that really gets in the way. But actually, I have a question for CatchJ and Edward. So, have you guys tried? Maybe I didn't focus 100% on your talk in case forgive me in case I missed it. Did you ever try like volumetric capturing? What do you think about that technology? Do you think that's going to replace a lot of the motion capture thing we're doing now?
Do you want to answer, or should I go first?
You can go. I don't mind.
So I've actually worked for a startup 1 or 2 years ago with a focus on volumetric video. And,
was it in Ireland?
No, it's in Germany.
Okay. Okay, I think I know the way.
But I know the Irish people as well. Katja does them.
So they're basically one in the UK, one in Ireland, and one in Germany, right?
Yeah, I think they are now everywhere. It's so it's Google, it's Microsoft, and then you have like smaller players. No, I think it's so. What's really cool about volumetric video is you have this kind of presence in virtual reality, but the production cost and quality. I mean, it's getting there, right? So every year there's small improvement. But what I've see as the most problematic aspect about volumetric video, I mean, it's playback. It's playback. So if you go for
not interactive,
you can tell cinematic stories with that, and it works fine. So you can have like a narrator who guides you through kind of like museum, or you can have a fancy actor who plays on stage. I mean, for this kind of scenarios, it works well. But I think when it comes like to the strength of virtual reality, which is interactivity, so you are in this virtual space, and you see there a person, and you want to handshake with this person, and this is like a pre-recorded video, and then it doesn't work. I think this destroys a lot of like plausibility.
Yeah, I think actually we tried one of this. Is it called the War of the Words, right, Marco? We went to see this together. Yeah. Did I put? No, you went to see it with a group of. Yeah, I went to see with a group of friends, but because Marco saw it and he told me. So basically they had the volumetric capturing character in the middle. We were all in headsets, and I think. Obviously, I know the technology behind it. So I was the only one who went into the character and actually looked at them, where everybody else kind of just stayed behind. I think like the assistant there really hated me because I was breaking everything. But I do feel that maybe not in the kind of traditional sort of game setting, but maybe for theater, right? Like for instance, here I think we work with we have a project in partnership with National Theatre, and I tried one of their pieces. I think it's called All Kinds of Limbo. And I think it really works. It's kind of have your own sort of theater in the headset in your living room, And I feel maybe for that kind of thing, and maybe in the near future, we can make them interactive as well. I don't think it's impossible. It is more difficult, more challenging because there's more data, and data is kind of put together in a different way. You have like different textures for each frame, and that's really difficult. But I think we can.
I think I already saw that real-time solution. At Stanford. I think they showcased it in Stanford. I don't know how well it works, but it's there. I think it's getting there.
Yeah,
So-
and I think maybe the next area is really kind of linking VR with all this, because in bioscience, they're very computational heavy, and they have parallel computing and all this. So maybe next step is really when you design things, you really need to use really powerful multi-core computers to even support. And with 5G, so you can have the experience rendered in the cloud and then delivered wirelessly to a headset. I think that's all possible, right? With 5G, apparently, I was talking to a 5G expert because I couldn't really understand how it works, but they managed to convince me that it will be able to support a wireless VR experience in real time, 70 frames per second, because it's robust, and it basically uses lots of redundancy, and it's very much oriented towards. So that there's a dynamic as well to make sure the signal actually is targeted towards the receiver rather than with Wi-Fi, just all sorts of directions. Yeah, that's my very basic understanding of. But I think 5G volumetric capturing will make interactive, highly realistic avatars everywhere, to the extent that you won't be able to tell who is real, who is virtual. I think, and that'll be quite an interesting future. Yeah, exactly. With all the deep fake and stuff. Yeah, so basically it's like Twitter going visual. Yeah. Okay, cool. I don't think we have more questions, but I would like to say that, I don't know if the YouTube channel will be available, but I think we can definitely go back to it if you have questions later and answer it on YouTube. And, with our video, you have probably our contact anyway, so do feel free to drop us an email if you have other questions. And I think we should just wrap up here. And it has been an absolute pleasure to work with all of you today here. Unfortunately, we should have been having a beer in Sweden now right after this. That was the whole point of it. But, we have to do with whatever we can do with. But, hopefully this is definitely also have drawn lots of attention to the virtual world. So, so it's not all bad news. And thanks a lot for everyone who are still watching us on YouTube, 26 of them of you. Okay, great. So, sorry I couldn't see you in person. But I'm sure there are also people who managed to join because, they otherwise wouldn't be able to fly to Sweden anyway. So they were able to share this. And hope I will see you in the future. And that's it, I guess. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.